Well, thank you for coming today. Thank you all for coming. My name is Jillian Weiss. This is my client, Brandi Branson. And what I want to talk about today is the fact that the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission yesterday filed the first lawsuit ever filed by that agency alleging sex discrimination against a transgender person. And that is the scope of this conference. Ms. Branson is a transgender woman. She worked as a hearing aid specialist at the Lakeland Eye Clinic in Lakeland, Florida. And although she performed her duties in a satisfactory manner, after she began her gender transition and notified the clinic of that, Lakeland Clinic fired her. The Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits sex discrimination. The federal courts have recognized that discrimination based on gender identity, including transgender identity, is sex discrimination. I want to thank the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for protecting all of our rights, including the rights of transgender Americans to engage in gainful employment without discrimination because of who they are. Transgender refers to people whose gender is different from that traditionally related to sex at birth. Estimates suggest approximately 700,000 transgender people in the United States. Transgender people have been hidden from public consciousness because of prejudice. They've been seen as strangers to the law, often being without the legal protection that the rest of us take for granted. Transgender discrimination is rampant in all areas of public and private life, including employment. A report issued by the National Center for Transgender Equality, based on extensive surveys, illustrates the grave extent of that discrimination. The report, called Injustice at Every Turn, is publicly available on the internet. It found that transgender Americans were 4 times more likely to live in extreme poverty. Transgender Americans have double the unemployment rate, and nearly all experience discrimination at work. The intense suffering of transgender people, particularly people of low income and people of color, cries out for relief. This is not right. This is not just. This must be changed. And we are here today to change it. So with that, I would like to turn to Ms. Branson for a short statement, and then we will take some questions.
Sorry. Excuse me. My name is Brandi Branson, and I am a transgender woman. I worked hard for the Lakeland Eye Clinic and was rewarded with discrimination. I did my job well, but after I told them I was transgender, I was fired. They made up a reason for my being fired, an untrue reason. And it's not just me saying that, it's the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that's saying it. After I told them about my gender transition, they stopped talking to me. They stopped sending me work. I would get the snickers and rolled eyes. They told me they were eliminating my position, but then they turned around and hired someone else in my place, and that was not fair. It was very painfully unfair. So I am here because I don't want this to happen to other transgender just for being who they are. Thank you.
All right, do we have any questions?
How long after you told them that you were going through gender transition, were you let go?
Can we speak to that?
Yeah, about how long was
How long
it?
after that did they fire? Did they hire somebody new?
It was probably about 2 months after I had actually sat down and revealed to them that I was transitioning on the job, that I was fired.
And how long after that did they hire somebody new?
About 2 weeks.
How did you know that?
It was advertised on the internet.
Can you talk about the emotional aspect to this? I'm sure this was not easy for you to go through.
No, it isn't. It's very painful. May I speak to that?
Please.
Okay. The emotional impact is deep because I was a veteran at doing what I did, had a good reputation, worked at this for over 30 years, and suddenly I was found to be useless and somehow derelict in my duties for having transitioned.
Had you ever been disciplined for anything at that job?
No,
Whatsoever?
No.
They never said you were not performing your duties satisfactorily?
no.
And I just want to say we're not going to get too deep into the details of the litigation, which will come out during the litigation process. So we'll, try to keep the details to a minimum.
Did you approach a manager and say, this is what I'm going to be doing, or did you just kind of show up, and how did that process work?
Right. So, we don't want to get too into the details of all of the events that occurred because this will come out through the litigation process. And so, we're not going to really go beyond the scope of the complaint and the filing.
If Brandi could address, what do you hope that this lawsuit accomplishes for others?
Well, it would be good to see people being able to live on the same playing field together and everybody being guaranteed the same fundamental rights. As an individual, as a woman, I'm not asking for something extra to be done for me, but I do want to have the same consideration that all my peers have.
Were you able to find another job?
You want to speak to that?
Well, we're not going to go too far beyond the scope of the complaint into her personal life. At this point, let's just say that Ms. Branson is coping with the aftermath of what occurred, and she is moved on.
Is she unemployed though? I mean, there is a difference there. I mean, is she unemployed? Is she found work?
Right. We're not going to address things outside the scope of the complaint. I understand that it's a very interesting question, but we're going to keep this press conference to the filing that has been made, which is the important issue here.
What are you suing for?
She's suing for, or it's actually, she is not suing. It's the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is suing to ask that these discriminatory practices be stopped, that there be changes in policy and training, and that Ms. Branson be made whole in terms of the discrimination and the aftermath that she experienced.
Financially whole?
Financially whole as well,
And
yes.
Is there, well, as well, okay, so there's two things you're suing for. Can you explain what being made whole is?
Being made whole would be a monetary compensation. That is the way that the courts work. Unfortunately, we cannot roll back the tape of time and give someone back their, lost time and opportunity and so on. But the way that the courts work is that if it is determined, and we believe that it will be determined that discrimination occurred, then the courts would decide what type of compensation, financial and otherwise, would be appropriate.
You have not made a number.
We have not named a number. In federal court, it's not typical to name any number.
Brandi, tell us again, how long were you at the Lakeland Eye Clinic?
A little less than 1 year,
But you've done that occupation for 30.
yes.
What did you like about that job? I mean, doing that, maybe hearing as a specialist?
Well, it helped people. That was the number one thing. I was terribly engaged with people of every background, and it was a really a heartfelt thing to be able to assist people to have a higher quality of life.
And this all went down in 2011, correct?
Pardon?
This all happened in 2011, correct?
My being fired? Yes. Mhm.
So I guess why now? What took? So I know this is the first lawsuit of its kind. Why this long?
The way that the process works on the federal level is that the complaint must first be brought to the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which has an administrative process. There is an opportunity for the respondent to provide its position. The agency does an investigation. Because the agency is quite understaffed, the investigations do take some time. And so while the investigation was completed some time ago, then there was a process of attempted conciliation, and after the failure of conciliation, which is, in other words, an attempt at kind of mediating or settling the matter, that at that point the agency makes a decision as to whether it will move forward with litigating the case on behalf of the victim. The agency does that in very few cases. In about maybe 300 cases a year, the agency decides to bring litigation on behalf of the EEOC. What it usually does when the conciliation fails is to issue a letter saying that they're dismissing the case from the EEOC and that the victim has the right to go to federal court within the next 90 days. In this case, they decided that it was a case of such importance that it should actually be litigated using the resources of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, yeah. Just, this being the first case of its kind, it's the first case that you guys are suing for transgender discrimination. Is that the correct wording?
Well, no, and let me just say, in terms of you guys, I am not with the EEOC. I am a private attorney representing Ms. Branson. So I apologize for not making that 100% clear before. I am a private attorney representing Ms. Branson. We brought the complaint to the EEOC. The EEOC has now made the decision to file this complaint. The EEOC has had previous complaints of transgender discrimination brought to it, but it has never been in a situation where it decided to then bring that complaint to the federal courts using the resources of the EEOC to litigate the case. Is that a little more clear? Okay.
Where were you before the Lakeland Eye Clinic? Were you working you said you were doing this for years. Where did you work before?
Well, let me just interrupt for a second. We're not going to get into details outside of the scope of the complaint and where she had been years before. Really, this conference is to give an opportunity to ask questions about the complaint and the filing.
Okay, well, I guess then my question is, were you at a previous place for a long period of time, or were you at different jobs from year to year? That's, I guess.
Okay, we're not going to get into the details of where she had been previously and what she's doing now. We're looking at the filing of the complaint and the historic nature of the first complaint being filed in federal court by the EEOC based on transgender discrimination.
You mentioned that in some ways this is kind of hidden from view of a lot of Americans, that there's only about 700,000 folks who identify as being transgender. Could you, Brandi, maybe just talk about, if you feel comfortable, and you don't have to answer anything you don't feel comfortable with, but talk about your personal evolution and when you started wanting to make these choices and I'm not saying the word choice, but when you decided to identify this way. And I think that might be useful for, if this is as important as you say it is, it might be useful for people out there who might be watching this who may look up to her.
Right.
So if you could kind of explain your personal evolution there, that would be really helpful.
Well, that is a really great question. I agree with you of its importance. But in terms of this press conference, we're going to confine ourselves to the filing that has been made and not necessarily discuss her whole personal history, which is, long and rich and varied. So that would be outside of the scope of our conference.
At the end of the day, simply put, what exactly are you after? Are you after in this lawsuit?
Well, I mean, the intent
Can
of...
you hear from her, though?
Well, absolutely. But just to clarify, you're asking about the intent of the lawsuit, like why?
In the lawsuit, at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, what exactly would you like to see happen here?
Okay. What do you want to see accomplished out of this lawsuit?
Well, probably one of the things is accountability. Sometimes people feel that because of this inordinate prejudice and fear that they'll never be accountable for doing things to people. And the other thing is to try to help restore a part of my life that I've lost.
You said that there was a lot of snickering among your coworkers during that time, and it was hard, I'm sure. Did you battle depression during that time?
Well, we're not going to specifically address her personal life, but if you want to say how you felt at that time having endured those issues?
It's almost in hindsight more heartrending than it is at the moment, because at the moment you're dealing with it, and to realize you're ostracized and verbally brutalized, behind your back and everything else. And the only reason I would know behind my back, you say, is because there were people who were good enough to say, they've been, and sure enough, some of those things turned out to be very more than true. But it was difficult. And when I began to identify as female, it became quite an unwarranted imposition put back on me to try to explain myself. And so that's when I made the decision to go to the company and formally explain my circumstance, that I was going to transition.
There may be people out there who see you tonight and who consider you someone that they admire for stepping forward. Do you feel like a hero for doing this and going public in this way?
It's a tough call, because I'm not a hero material. But somebody once said that the difference with a hero is they run toward the gunfire, not away from it. So I don't know. It's come at me in ways I never imagined. I've had to deal with things I never dreamed of, and I'm still here. And so whether or not somebody determines I'm a hero or not is up to them, but I'm doing what I think is the right thing to do and is good for me.
Do you mind disclosing your age?
Pardon?
Do you mind disclosing your age?
No, we're not going to discuss her age at this time. I'm sure that at some point it may come out, but we're really not discussing her personal circumstances so much as the fact of the filing of the complaint and what's alleged in there.
Can you just correctly spell her name so we can?
Absolutely.
Brandi.
Sure. Yeah, you want to just spell?
Yeah, it's Brandi.
Okay, that's fine.
Would you have any problem telling us what your first, I assume this wasn't your first name was?
Yeah, that's a really great question as well, and it's very interesting that you ask it, because it is a question of great sensitivity to transgender people who have brought themselves forth in a new iteration, and often they prefer not to have that previous name kind of splashed around. My thinking is that that is really kind of outside of the issues. But I will say this, it's in the complaint. So if you read the complaint, you will see it in there, and you'll be able to get that information. But I'd rather not discuss it in detail here.
Jillian, before we forget, can we get the spelling of your name as well?
Yes, it's Jillian, and the last name is Weiss, Weiss.
And you are her personal attorney?
Yes,
Okay, so she comes to you, and then you decide to go to the EEOC, and the EEOC says we can take this to court.
correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
And is it Branson, Branson?
Yes, ma'am.
What's next, as far as legal filing is concerned? What's next?
Well, I mean, the complaint has now been filed, and the normal procedure is that the opposing side has a certain amount of time to answer that complaint, and that will be filed as well, and then there will be a opportunity for the parties to discover information about the case from each other. So that's the general guidelines. Any other questions? Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Do you have a copy of that complaint?
Thank you.
I don't have it with me.
Send it to us?
I'd be happy to if you give me your card. Yes.
All right.
All right, let's.